Well, this seems like a simple little story. Now, I've got a picture. When I read this story and I think of the persistent widow and I hear those words, never give up, this is the image that comes to my mind. Of the little frog being swallowed by the stork, or probably around here it would be a pelican, I guess. And there's something, I guess, it tickles my funny bone, but I like the notion that this is a stalemate. As long as the frog has got his hands clamped firmly around the throat of the stork, he can't be swallowed. And while he's in that position, neither one can win. And it's a little bit similar to what's happening in this passage. We have this stalemate where the woman and the unjust judge, neither one wants to give in a sense. But the very first verse, if you like, is almost the punchline. And it says, Luke puts this in, Jesus told this story about prayer, being persistent, that we would never give up. So that's what comes to my mind when I think of never giving up. It's told, however, in a traditional rabbinic style, where there's this principle at work where we move from something light to something heavy. That is a light illustration of just everyday life, something just daily living. And we move from that into something that's heavy. That's the application of this, has serious meaning and serious consequences. So that's the principle. And they love telling stories that way, that they'd start out with this, an everyday example, but then draw something deep from it. So that's this light to heavy principle. And the story is almost, pray fervently when God is doing something, when God's at work in your life and making changes. Pray about it all the time. But pray even more faithfully when he seems far away. That's the challenge to the faithful people, to the disciples. Now I can see how Luke would remember this story particularly as Jesus' followers are facing rejection and hostility on every side. As Luke's writing his gospel, I can just see him going, and I remember Jesus told this great story. When difficult times come, he told us about persistence in prayer. It was about this widow. But first of all, he actually introduces the judge. He says there was this judge in a particular place, and he was a man who neither feared God nor respected men. There's some really rich cultural language in this story. Now, the judge, we're told, is a man who could not be shamed. Now, you know that these stories come from a shame and pride sort of a culture where, if something happens to your family or somebody does something that sort of smears your family name, it's terrible. It's all about having pride in your family and in your family name, who you are. But anything that might bring shame on you, it was just disaster and to be avoided at all costs. But we're told this man has no shame. There's nothing you could do to make him blush, nothing you could do to embarrass him or bring shame on him in any way. Can you imagine? It's a really rich description of this judge. In their culture too, they brought kids up to understand this. So you wouldn't tell off a child, for instance, if they did something wrong. You wouldn't say, "That's wrong, Johnny." Appealing to some abstract notion of, or a list of that which is right and that which is wrong. That's out here. So we have this list, and children form a list of right things and wrong things, and it's quite abstract. Rather, in their culture, they would say, that is shameful, Barry. Appealing to the feelings of shame that should be associated. You're teaching them to associate shame with certain things and pride with other things. So it's very much a personal thing. It's not some abstract thing. And that's how they're brought up. Yet this man, this judge, cannot be shamed. So you could cry out to this judge, for God's sake, do X, Y, and Z, but it would have no effect because he does not fear God. You could cry, shame on you for doing X and Y and Z, but it would have no use because he just doesn't care. So that's the judge. And then we're introduced to the widow. Now, the widow traditionally, right through the Old Testament and right through the New Testament, but to a lesser degree, the widow is an image of the innocent, of the powerless, quite often, the oppressed. In Isaiah chapter 1, he calls on the rulers and all the people to plead for the widow. Later on, he says, in that same passage, he says of the judges, everyone loves a bribe, but the widow's cause doesn't come to them. The widow, this widow, it would seem is too weak to compel the judge to vindicate her. She's obviously too poor to buy justice and buy the right decision. So she's stuck. And she goes to the court and cries out for justice and for vindication. Now, I want you to imagine the court scene. In Jesus' day, you come through the city gates on your dusty path, and as you come in, there's a courtyard off to the right. Some few steps leading up. It's not a big courtyard, no bigger than this church. And in that courtyard, up the front, sits a judge, and it's full of people all yelling and screaming and clamouring for their case to be heard first. They know he's only going to be there in the morning and he'll be gone by lunchtime because that's all he wants to work, and he's only going to hear a few cases. So everybody's screaming at him, you need to hear my case. My case is more important than theirs. This terrible things happen. Judge, you have to listen. This terrible man has stolen my property, or, stolen my donkey or whatever. And the man is going, no, it's a complete lie. He hasn't. No, I did nothing. I was never near his donkey. It was my land in the first place. All these people yelling and screaming. You can imagine a whole group of people doing that all at the same time. The judge, however, just sits there very calmly. Maybe he's got his eyes closed. He's not even looking at who's yelling and screaming, and doesn't appear to respond to anyone or anything. But on each side, on the left and the right of his special judge's seat, there'd be 3 or maybe 4 officers. Okay, now they just sit there and they're whispering quietly, and people might come up and, pull on their sleeve and say, and nothing happens until one of those officers leans over very quietly to the judge and just whispers in his ear, we've got the right price on number 5 over here. And the judge will say, I feel I will hear this case. And that case gets heard. And, for whatever reason, this hand has been, shaken and gilded and passed on to that one. And that's how the system worked. And then somebody else would whisper in the other ear and say, yep, we've arranged an agreement over here. That's the court scene that she goes into. Remember, we're going from light into heavy here. This is just an everyday example. And the woman is in a hopeless situation. She's a woman in a man's world. You see, the women didn't go to court pretty much ever. That wasn't their place. She's a widow without money. She doesn't have enough money to pay the official to get the right price, to make sure the case is heard and the right thing gets done. She doesn't have powerful friends who could go and do that on her behalf. So what we find is that she comes before a judge who cannot be appealed to out of duty towards God to do the right thing. He can't be ashamed of any evil act that he might have done or, allowed to happen to an innocent party. Yet this woman comes continually screaming out from the back, and maybe hers is the only female voice in that cacophony of male voices. And this woman not only gets a hearing, but gets her case settled in her favour. And this is where it gets heavy, I guess. If this woman's needs are met, how much more the needs of his children who pray not to a harsh judge, but to a loving Father. If her needs can be met by an unjust judge, how much more your prayers when you go to a loving Father? No matter how discouraged or hopeless it may seem to be, it's not as bad as she had it. She had this horror of a judge to plead before, and that was the only person she could plead to. So you can rest assured that your petitions, that your needs are heard and acted on because of who you approach. You always have God on your side. God is always loving you. And even though you're a sinner, God would put aside his anger, his concerns about that, to hear your prayers. That is our promise. So you're always miles in front of this poor widow. So when fear grips your heart, the challenge is pray faithfully. Pray continually in the face of discouragement with full confidence that God acts in your favour and in your best interest. Now, your best interest may not be yes straight away. As Jodie was talking to the kids, I was so pleased she brought in the P for patience. We sometimes need that. If the other things aren't the case, sometimes we just have to wait and be patient. We don't like it, but we can still be people of confidence, people of faith, knowing that God is working in our best interest without our understanding of the fullness of all of that, the wheres and the wherefores. You'll note, however, there's a little sting in the tail of this story. I'm not sure if you picked it up. It's a little bit like the parable of the prodigal son. It's all about the welcome home of the prodigal and the complete love of the father for the prodigal. But then the end of the story just leaves you wondering, but do you act like the second son? It's a twist a bit like that. Jesus says, will God make vindication for his elect, for his children? The ones who cry to him day and night? And then there's this funny passage, and he's slow to anger over them. Or sometimes our Bibles translate it, He's patient with them. And then the last line, the promise, I tell you, he will make vindication for them and do so speedily. I just want to back up to that third line. God's patience with his children. Again, there's this wonderful, rich language, image behind just that word that we find so really difficult to translate. Sometimes we say that he's patient, because it's actually, and God is, it's closer to say God is slow to anger over his children. Okay, and you think, well, why is God angry with us? It's not that God's angry with us. Patience has a better notion, but it's also forbearance. This word that has a sense that God is kind to us, his loving kindness. And it's the image is of. I read a story about a king in a village, in a city, and he had a garrison of his army, and he was wondering where he should station the army. And this is a parable. His decision was, I will station my security force, my army and the soldiers, I will put them way over here in the valley next door to us. Just in case the people get up to mischief on the weekend and, there's rioting in the streets or that something goes wrong, it will take a long time for the army to get here and bring retribution. That there is this gap, this distance, this time lag deliberately built in because he wants them to be able to see what's coming and he wants them to be able to repent. He wants to give them that time to turn themselves around deliberately. And the image is that God is doing that with his children. He's setting aside the separation between you and him for the moment so he can listen to your prayers. He has to do that. If he's to listen to you, he has to not be concerned with that separation and leave that to the fact that Christ has dealt with that. And accept that you are his child and he hears you. God's grace is at work in us. When we pray, God's grace does that for us. And God is slow to anger. He is patient and forbearing. He sets aside his anger and allows us to work in that space of his grace, that our prayers will be heard. And Jesus says, I tell you, he will make vindication for them, and quickly, speedily. And there's the sting. But when the Son of Man comes on earth, will he find faith? See, we thought this was a lovely little tale about prayer and being persistent. And Jesus, in that last sentence, tells us it's actually a story about our faith. He says, you know all of this. You know that God loves you and that God pleads on your case, that God is for you. You know that he is gracious and sets aside, the mistakes that you've made. He washes all of that clean and wants to hear your petitions and will vindicate for you quickly. But will you be faithful? Will you remember all of those promises contained? Prayer conquers fear. Persistence in prayer is the appropriate position for his children. That's where we should be. In prayer, we address a loving Father, not a shameless judge. And we can have confidence in that. God does cover us in grace. He puts any anger and judgment and wrath to the side. And we get grace. And God is at work to vindicate. He will vindicate us. Just as he did vindicating Christ. Though Christ, his journey went through Golgotha, it went through the cross and death. But the vindication came. Christ vindicates us. But the prayer of the faithful people requires self-examination. As we continue in our prayers, there is this role where we examine ourselves. Are we, in fact, faithful? Are we, in fact, living in hope? Are we trusting in those promises that God is the loving God, not a shameless judge? Do we really know it and believe it and then live like that's the case?